I predicted the election would go to Biden yesterday. Just did it on camera, and lo and behold. Sometimes people ask me to predict the sex of their child. And I've always thought this is kind of funny because, you got a 50% chance of being right. So if you get asked by enough people, what are we going to have, a boy or girl, and you just guess boy or girl every time, half of them come back and they're like, oh my God, you're amazing. And then, they ask you again on number 2, you've got a 25% chance of making it on number 2 if you just guess whatever. You got 50%, another 50% makes you 25%. And so, at least 1 out of 4 people are like, oh my God, you've got a perfect track record, you're amazing. So anyway. I'm not generally so involved in politics, but it was a big enough event and a big enough kerfuffle this time around that I read up daily on the Hill, which is sort of nonpartisan, conservative leaning, and then Fox News, which is more far right, and then CNN, which is more far left. Although they all try to say that they're centrist, it's not really true. And on CNN, part of what they do during the day is they have groups of pundits sitting together arguing. Usually it's a groupthink type situation where they all agree with each other and they talk about how stupid the other side is. CNN did something cool, and actually Fox does it as well. They'll bring in somebody from the other side to even it out, and it ends up being like a 3-on-1 debate going on. So anyway, one of the guys on the Democrat side, this black guy whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were talking about, they had some big guys on there, Cuomo and the other kind of major players, but this other guy was a minor commentator. He was there, but he was in the second position, and they asked him what he thought, and so he said that he started talking, and he fully broke down crying. And not the sniveling broke down crying, which gets to be problematic because you can't hear anything the person's saying and they're just like, and you're just like, come on, dude. We're live right now. Keep it together, dude, There's one guy at the UFC one time, he was translating for a Korean fighter, and he started geeking out on Joe Rogan, I'm so excited to be here. And Joe was like, hey, dude, you're a translator. Keep it together. It's not about you. And so anyway, this guy started cracking up, but not to the point where he became, what do I want to say? I want to say illegible is not the word I'm looking for. The word I'm looking for is he became... Unintelligible. Unintelligible, thank you. Yeah, he didn't become unintelligible. He kept it together. So it was kind of it gave a little bit of a dramatic kick to his performance where here's a black guy, and now, and Trump is a racist, bigot, xenophobe, boogeyman. And then now this person's been vindicated because Trump lost. And he's breaking up, he's crying, but he's still intelligible and making good points. And so his emotion became a real dramatic flare. It really It really strengthened his presentation. It was impressive. And then he just, I don't think that he rehearsed the speech, but man, he hit a home run, grand slam home run at the end, like the last 10 seconds. He said, now I can raise my kids and I can look them in the eye and I can tell them, see, if you have integrity, if you have character, if you speak the truth, if you live according to values, then you're successful. And if you don't, in due course of time, you're found out. Do you guys follow this? And that was what they finished at. He was like crying and speaking intelligibly, and he finished with that. It was like, whoa. It was like a mic drop moment. Probably the best one I've seen of the whole campaign. There's been a few, montages that people put together, which were also quite stunning and powerful. But this was, in terms of somebody giving a little speech about the election, I thought this was particularly, for me, it was quite impactful. I don't got that much hanging on the election. You could say, well, if you were an immigrant, you would. Maybe. But there's no real way for us to find out, is there? I'd have to go and immigrate to this country or be born black, and then we'd have to see if I could stick to the multi-thousand-year-old message of my tradition. I certainly don't think it's unreasonable for me to say I don't put so much stock in politics because there's plenty of immigrants and people of color and black people, and even there were plenty of slaves in the not too distant past who managed to make peace with this world and stick to their guns. You go back a little while, you've got the early Christians. I don't know how much you guys know about the history of the church, but the Romans would kill the Christians unless they renounced their faith verbally. Now, Peter blew it 3 times in one day. He spent the rest of his life regretting it, but he didn't stick to his guns. By the way, nobody ever regrets having too much integrity. I can at least speak for myself and all the people I've spoken to in life. Nobody thinks, wow, I wish I was more shallow, and I wish I'd been more shallow, and I wish I had indulged, and I wish I had given up my values more often and become a hypocrite and been weak and been shallow and been a sensualist and compromised my values for some cheap flickering pleasure. Nobody says that. At least I never have. I've never felt like that my entire life. Every time I've stuck to my guns, I've felt so fortunate that in that critical moment, I was given some strength and some inspiration to do the right thing. And every time I've ever failed to live up to my values, on any level, I've been plagued with a concomitant feeling of remorse that's been real curative. So anyway, I appreciated this gentleman's sentiment, and I definitely appreciated his articulation and his flair for the dramatic. That said, if Trump won again, it really would not affect my faith or my parenting or the way I deal with my kids. I got to explain tsunamis killing people and congenital heart defects. You follow? I don't just have to explain what do I want to call them? The orange creep, Like, that's not the extent of what I have to explain in order to preserve my faith in the basic idea of a law of reciprocity, a law of karma. The depth of my faith and trust and experience, and also the logic of such things, doesn't depend on Trump getting what's coming to him today. You follow? I mean, I had my kid when he was 4, just one of my kids, asked me, how come Fukushima, how come Krishna killed all those people in Fukushima with the nuclear reactor? You know what I mean? It's like if you got a hard time with the orange snuffleupagus, and that's gonna break you down and make you incapable of holding on to your paradigm or your worldview. Just look around the world a little more broadly, and you'll find infinite things that that deal a death blow to your value system and some kind of concept of a basic, inherent value in being good. Did you guys follow that? Did you understand what I just said? Let me say it again. Are we spaced now? Yeah. I was clear. I listen to myself when I talk, and I know when I butcher it and sound like the village idiot, and I know when I made my point solidly. I made my point solidly, but you looked vexed, and that's how I knew. It's okay. We're good. The rest of you space out, or did you get it? Good. Yeah. My worldview, my understanding of the law of reciprocity, cause and effect, karma, as you sow, so shall you reap, that there is a logic to the universe, that morality is encoded in the fabric of the universe. Those things aren't dependent on Trump losing the election. Because if it was, and I was like this really smart and nice, but super shallow and like profoundly foolish pundit on CNN, then you just got to open your eyes and look at the congenital heart defects and all the kids dying at the age of 6 months and all the massive disasters that are happening all over the world. There's a civil war about to erupt in Ethiopia. You know? South America just got hit by a hurricane. Like stuff's happening all the time. "25% of the world's children are aborted. 20% of America's children are aborted. You know what I mean? There's just so much stuff. 5 million kids a year are stunted. That means they'll be like 4 to 6 inches shorter than they should be because they got malnutrition at that young, incredibly important age, 3 to 5. 10 million people a year die of starvation. 3 million of them are kids. What'd they do? You follow? So if you're that thin-skinned that Trump winning the election breaks your faith in ethics and makes you incapable of parenting your children, you're paper thin. You're not gonna make it very far in life. I don't think it's wrong to have evidence and then use that evidence as a way of coming up with some sort of epistemology, some kind of way of verifying truth. I don't think that's wrong. But there's also more generic, fundamental, logical arguments, like the cosmological argument that we'll get into in just a tiny bit of detail, because I've got somewhere I want to go with you guys tonight. I just felt like I had to at least, do a little homage to the election, because it just happened, and it's a big event for the world, to be honest. I mean, that's enough of a reason to be into Biden. It's like the entire planet thinks we're idiots. Unless you're from, I want to say a country that nobody's going to get offended by, but like if you're from like rural Turkmenistan, then you're like, Trump is like a very good, if you're like from Borat's native place, then you know what I mean? Trump tried to call Biden like weak and like elderly, but I would pick Biden in a fist fight with Trump. He's a lot more sprightly, I think he'd be able to snipe Trump, hit him from a distance, and Trump would fatigue and they'd be able to go in for the kill. If I had to put my money on it, just saying. Sometimes I've watched Big Tobacco engage in debates. Those guys are they're some of the best debaters I've ever seen in my life. It's unbelievable how good those guys are. They're legit, legit sophists. They're like from a land beyond time. They've really got it down. Anyway, I watched a Big Tobacco guy debating with it's the easiest debate in the world to win. It's like the anti-tobacco debate. If you lose an anti-tobacco debate, you suck. You know what I mean? And if you can win a pro-tobacco debate, you're the man, or the woman, or whatever, right? So the Big Tobacco guy, the anti-tobacco guy got up there and he just did a whole thing. A bunch of kids born deformed and old people coughing up a lung, just the regular standard stuff. And the Big Tobacco goes, I get it. He says, but there's just something about America and being free in America and being able to live the kind of life you want to live. And there's something like romantic and libertarian and just about if you want to smoke, being able to do that and not having people try to tell you what to do and beat you down with socialism and try and make you conformist. And there's something about that, it's woven into the fabric of our society. If you look at the Old West, and you look at the Founding Fathers, and you look at the pioneers of this country, the real men of this country, you find that they smoked tobacco, and there was something about that spoke to their wild ruggedness. I was just like, I thought that was like the best argument. I was just like, whoa! And the guy he was talking, basically he emasculated the guy. You know what I mean? That's what he did. So the guy had all these facts and figures like a Poindexter, and then he emasculated him, and he won the debate. And the Poindexter guy didn't know what to do because with all the facts and figures, he just sounded wimpy. You follow? I thought what should have happened. The rebuttal would be an argumentum ad baculum, which is an argument of the stick. It's called dunda in traditional Indian political theory. In Indian political theory, and Krishna actually makes reference to this in the Gita. There's sama, arta, bhed, danda. Samadhan, bhed, danda. Sama, it's where you get the word same from in English. It means you just be equanimous. You just ignore the person. And just the dog will bark, but the caravan will pass. A lot of times you just ignore somebody and they'll go away and leave you alone. There was like the person in charge of the elections in Arizona. And he was talking, it was so good. And I saw this on Stephen Colbert. It was fantastic. and this really fat dude with a shirt on that said barbecue, beer, and I can't remember what the third one was. What was it? Barbecue, beer, and freedom. He was the guy from the Big Tobacco, but a few years down the road, you know? He said a big shirt said barbecue, beer, and freedom. He looked totally disheveled, looked like a homeless guy. And he looked like he was intoxicated. And he came running up to the podium, and he started screaming, like, Biden Mafia, trying to steal the election, Biden Mafia, Democratic Mafia, something like that. I can't remember what it was. You remember what it was? Biden crime family. He said it over and over again, like spastically. And the guy who was in charge of the election board just stood there and kind of looked at him and just stood there silently. So he came and interrupted the presentation. And the Biden guy just stood there, not the Biden guy, but the elected official of in Arizona just stood there and watched him. And eventually the guy kind of flamed out and then just kind of like walked away. And then the election official just turned right back to the mic and goes, and so as I was saying, and just went right back into, like, didn't miss a beat. It was so good. So anyway, that's Sama. You ignore the person. Then there's Dom. You engage in a little pork belly politics. Have you guys ever heard that term before? Pork belly politics? It's super low class. It's like when you say, hey, I'm going to treat you with kid gloves. You ever heard that one? Kid gloves? What does that mean? Kid gloves. I'll treat you with kid gloves. What does that mean? Huh? That's what it means. But where does the term come from? What's the origin of that term? That's right. Most people might think it's from like a child, like a kid. And so you're like, it's like small gloves or something like that. It's not soft. Because if you kill a young animal, which is called a kid, and you skin it, then that leather is real soft and supple. Thank you. That leather is real soft and supple. So it's a real gross term. I had to stop using it. Pork belly politics is the same. It's the idea that you spread some love around and you give people some pork belly. You give them some like if you cut up a pig and you like give some of the like the nice part of the pig, you give that to people and you dole it out, and that way you satisfy the people on the other side of the aisle and you're able to get some legislation pushed through. It's called pork belly politics. It's obviously an old term in American politics. So the first thing is you ignore the person, Sama, then Don, then you give them something, a position, some kind of nominal, this or that, some diplomatic position. You see this a lot of times. They'll advance a piece of legislation and they'll attach just a bunch of stuff to it that has nothing whatsoever to do with the legislation. But what they're essentially saying is, if you want us to vote on this and pass it, you got to give us the stuff we want. And so you end up with a piece of legislation that has 3 or 4 things in it that have nothing whatsoever to do, and that's just what you got to do to pass it. That's Don. Then Bade. Bade is divide and conquer. That like gets into like Machiavelli and Sun Tzu. And it's in the beginning of aggressive politics. It's covert. And that's where you get into like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Anyone I share a border with is my enemy. And any other country that shares a border with them is my friend. You follow? That's why Russia needed Poland, by the way. Because all of the Germans somehow are like the bane of Russia's existence. They've invaded Russia multiple times. But all those invasions always came through Poland. That was the channel they came through. And so that's why it was so important to Russia post-World War II to be in charge of Poland. They gave England Greece because for the shipping lanes, it was important for England to control Greece because they went to the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal. So anyway, I don't want to go too far off track. But and then the last one is dund. Dund means stick. When you say dandavat, it means stick-like. It means you lay down and you offer your respects to someone and you lay down like a stick and you prostrate yourself. Actually, a push-up in India is called a dund because you make your body into a board and then push yourself up and down. That's called dund. Now, like nowadays, it's in Sanskrit it's also, but also in modern Hindi. And so in Latin, that's called argumentum ad baculum. Argument of the stick. So what should have happened in that debate when the guy started emasculating him is the anti-cigarette guy, the anti-tobacco guy, should have said, yeah, but I'm more manly than you. I'll beat you in a fight. You follow? There's a time and a place for that. And so Krishna actually says, Dando damayatamaham. Of means of controlling things, I'm the stick. Heavy, right? Of means of controlling, damayatam. Of controls, danda. Dando damayatam aham. I am the stick. When all else fails. And really, if you think about it, civilization is based on this principle. If you go and commit murder, what happens? If you go and commit murder, an armed gang of men and women will track you down and lock you in a box. And they have permission to kill you if they need to. All of our laws are based on a principle of violence. Just like Trump was like, I won, I won't leave. He's like such a baby. It's embarrassing actually. He's like got like the Idi Amin thing going on or something like that. If you guys know who that was, it was a president of Uganda who used to kill people and was just a classic despot. But Trump's got that I won't leave, like he can just say that. And so then the Biden campaign jumped in and they said, you know, the United States of America is more than capable of removing trespassers from the White House. It was such a diss, you know. It was like real, real direct, but not real confrontational. But it was a major slap, like a backhanded slap, you know. And so ultimately, all governance is based on this principle of punishment. We're going to come after you, and if you just continue to not let us come after you, we'll escalate. We'll escalate. And if you try to not let us grab you, we'll grab you. And if you don't let us grab you, we'll grab you with force. If you put up too much of a fight, we'll hurt you. If you put up too much of a fight, we'll actually kill you. Without that, all of our laws become guidelines, and then there's you know, like when a police officer pulls you over, you've been detained. There's 3 levels of detention with a police officer. Any police officer can come up to you and have a conversation with you. And if you talk to him, then you're agreeing to talk to him. They can say, can I come in your house? You should let me in your house right now. And you could go, do I have to? And they go, yeah, you have to. But you don't have to. They're allowed to lie to you. Isn't that right, Howard? Howard's a former police officer. LAUSD police officer. So I'm not making this stuff up. A police officer can engage you. Can I search your bag? Do I have to let you? Yes, you do. Okay, here you go. Then when you go to court, you go, he told me I had to. Yeah, they're allowed to lie to you. So the first one's a conversation. If you want to know if you're being detained, you say, am I free to go? Am I free to go? Usually people who are disenfranchised, minorities in general, impoverished people who have more interactions with police officers, usually people of color, and especially black people, they know these laws real well. I saw a video on YouTube of a guy with his backpack, and a cop said, "Hey, what's in that backpack?" And the guy looked back at the cop and said, he said, "A whole lot of none of your business." He used a few four-letter expletives that make it actually sound way cooler. He said, a whole bag of none of your business. And he just walked off because he knew the cop had no reason to stop him. The respectful way to that is say, am I being detained? If a police officer pulls you over, you are being detained because it doesn't make sense, because if you're driving and a cop tries to start a conversation with you in the other car, you don't know whether he's detaining you or not, and therefore the law is if he pulls you over, he's detaining you. And that's why you can say at any point, am I free to go? And then the last one is you're being arrested. Probable cause to detain you, right? And then to arrest you, it's for the arrest. That's what it is. Reasonable suspicion to detain you, probable cause for the arrest. But whenever a police officer pulls you over, if you don't pull over, you know what happens?
They chase you.
No, that's what they start. They start by chasing you. Then you know what happens? I don't know what that means. You know what happens next? You guys have never watched these things on the news? If you don't pull over, they chase you for a while, then they get sick of that. They throw spikes down the road to blow out your tires. Then if that still doesn't work, they ram your car with their car and force you off the road. And by the time they ram your car off the road, if you do a little bit this, like you drive back and forth, like they've trapped you and rammed you off the road, but you still do this with your car, they shoot you and kill you. Because the car is a deadly weapon, and they get really pissed. And so if you see it happen all the time. A 3-hour chase, guy runs out of gas, but he's still doing a little bit of this. Cops get out of the car, they all have their guns drawn, and the guy just moves the car a little bit, and 50 bullets fly into the window, and the guy's killed. Violence is at the core of every civilization. It's underneath, it's the substratum of every law. So anyway, I thought Biden should have just been when Trump would say he's old, I thought Biden should be I'll beat you in a race. I'll beat you in a fight. I thought it would have been fantastic. The two people who are vying. And I don't think Trump would have taken him up on it. Like I said, I would have put my money on Biden. He's small, but at that age, you know what I mean? I don't think Trump would be able to use his weight. All right, so that was just a little fun with the election for you guys. I don't care that Trump won or didn't win. I do think it makes us look better to the rest of the world, and I think it's better for immigrants. It's probably, of course, then there's a whole abortion thing we're going to have to deal with now. That's not my cup of tea, and I find some good, and there's different kinds of Republicans. I guess I'll just say this, and then I'll switch gears. And it's all going to come together because I'm smart like that. A lot of Republicans are just Republicans because they vote Republican no matter who the candidate is, and it doesn't matter. You get 48% of the vote automatically just by being the red candidate. And they're Republicans sometimes because they're really religious. And the abortion thing's a big deal. I can imagine people in Utah don't like Trump, but because of his official stance on abortion, then, they vote with him. So you get 48% of the vote, blue or red, automatically just by being the candidate. Then you're arguing over that last 5%. Some Republicans are Republicans for religious reasons. Some are Republicans because of financial reasons. They don't want to get taxed too much. And Republicans are always less for tax, they're more for free market, they're more for capitalism, they're less socialist. Everybody's socialist to some extent. Socialism is thrown around like it's a bad word. Everybody is a socialist to some extent. The belief that everybody should have access to health care is a socialist perspective. The idea that no one should go hungry in your country is a socialist perspective. It's not the full, it can still exist in a mixed economy, but there is some sense in which you're trying to control the means of production enough to ensure that people have something. If you believe in welfare, welfare is socialism 101. Food stamps are socialism 101. And so nobody's saying there shouldn't be any of this. So, you find that some people are just more free market, they're more for less taxes, and that's why they vote Republican. Then you get people who are into guns, and so they vote Republican. Then you get people who are into libertarian ideals, but they lean libertarian conservative as opposed to libertarian left, and so they libertarian conservative instead of libertarian liberal, and so they go and they also vote Republican. Some people are actually into the cult of Trump, but I think that they represent a minority. And I think it's increasing because of social media and the way that we're indoctrinating people through social media. And if you watch Fox, it's like disturbing because you're like in the belly of the beast, and these people all have all these wacky, erroneous ideas. And then, but when you go over to CNN, it's not 100% better. It's not like the white. It's not like the perfect. I have to be careful about that black and white thing. It's not like perfect over there. There's a bunch of groupthink over there as well. And so, yeah, we sculpt the way we train people through media, through social media. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I've said it a couple times now, but if you search on Google and you enter the same word, you'll get two totally different results depending on what your history is. And you'll get ever increasingly extreme left-wing propaganda or ever increasingly extreme right-wing propaganda as you start to click and go down that rabbit hole. And the more extreme, the more likely you are to keep clicking, and then they can sell you to advertisers because your eyes are on the computer screen, and they're selling impressions, and they're selling clicks, and there's big money in that, and you're the commodity. And so they figure out what your poison is, and they just continue to indoctrinate you and give you bigger and bigger dopamine hits. No different than drugs. Bigger and bigger dopamine hits. And so like I see you start off and you're like, I don't know, free elections, and then it's like, oh, you're on the chemtrails, and then you're like, and then you're into like, the 3 lines and the E of the Biden campaign, and that's the 3 lines of communism from Mao, from his campaign in the 50s. They had that. They had the 3 flags of communism. That's what that represents, because Kamala Harris, is in deep with Alexandria. What's her name? Ocasio-Cortez, who's a declared socialist. And so this is what's really going to happen. And then Biden's going to get the presidency, but then he's going to knock it over to her, and then we're going to be run by a socialist. And Kamala Harris got voted the most socialist, most liberal senator out of all 100 senators. It's like, it's no joke. She's definitely like far to the left. And then it's the Illuminati, and pretty soon it's like there's lizard people living in subterranean caves, and like, and you never come back, That's what it is, man. So, anyway, at this point, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to post this one either. I didn't post yesterday's lecture. I recorded it, and if you heard it, you heard me, speak on this. But in general, I'm not into being too political. A, because I minister to people, and they need somebody who's neutral. And B, because I embraced Krishna consciousness as my revolution, and I don't want to sully myself by doing something else. Just like if a doctor goes off and fights in war, he won't be able to save people. If a doctor goes and protests the war, he won't be able to save people. He can be a doctor. It's like the Hare Krishna devotees in Liberia during the Civil War, where they were eating people. Let me say that again. Liberia, northwest coast of Africa, during the Civil War in the early aughts, when they were eating people, full-on recorded cannibalism. The devotees were distributing prasad to both sides. In the war, in the Yugoslavian war, which is my ethnic background, when the Serbs got control and had the rape camps and were raping the Bosnian and Croatian women. I'm Serbian. And they were raping the Bosnian and Croatian women to try to blot out their bloodline because that's what had been done to them 50 years prior, and it's been going back for centuries. That's why I get a great tan, because it's all mixed up over there between the Bosnians, which are Muslims, and the Croats, which are Catholics, and the Serbs, which are Orthodox. It's like some of the worst crimes against humanity have been done there. The devotees were distributing prasad in Sarajevo when it was like a war zone, and they were delivering prasad to both sides. And so we've got a calling. We're committed to it. We think it's going to be what's going to do the best thing in the world, and we don't want to get too hung up on the good because we're too busy doing the best. And so for other people, I don't like to get too political, and for myself, I don't like to get too political. I don't want to start embracing the good instead of the best. I feel like what I'm doing in my life is the best thing. I'm real comfortable with that. I don't think it's necessarily what everybody needs to do with their life. There needs to be priests, and there also needs to be laity or congregations, and I'm the priest. And so I need to live a little bit of a different life than most people. I find Trump to be a repugnant human being because he doesn't stand for the things I've spent my life cultivating, like chastity and integrity and honesty and depth and spirituality. And so I don't think he's a great leader. I think Biden's better, but I don't think Biden's, I mean, Biden eats meat. It's like, come on, you know what I mean? And it's like you just became an animal in my book. Like you're not even a human being yet. If you're killing animals, causing pain unnecessarily, you're an incredibly cruel person. Fundamentally, you haven't even arrived at the party yet. You're not even in the ballpark yet. Anyway, although I find Trump repugnant for a number of reasons, whether he wins or loses or gets rich or gets poor or gets the girl or gets castigated or gets canceled or not, really doesn't. It doesn't make a difference. My paradigm and my worldview runs deeper than that. And it runs deeper than that for a couple of reasons. One is when I look at this world, I find that the universe follows rules, namely the rules of Newtonian and quantum mechanics. I also notice the world is... Now, most of quantum mechanics is, to some extent, doesn't make a distinction between past and future. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Einstein's theory of relativity, but time is just another factor to be plotted, and the experience of time is a grand illusion. That's not true for thermodynamics. Entropy is time dependent. And so it's not that, the whole universe can be seen as independent of time. But when we look at the world, I realize I lost a couple of you, so let me just say it again, and I'll try to make it more clear. When I look at the world, I find the world follows rules, such as gravity. And it also follows rules such as time. Time indicates that causes precede effects. And if we can get rid of time, or we can not calculate time, in certain theories of physics, in other super important basic structures of the world, time is an important factor. And time indicates movement from point A to point B. You follow? So when I look around the world, I find that the universe follows rules. It's orderly. It's logical. And it's also moving forward from causes to effects. Have you followed me? I also find that there's consciousness. And consciousness seems to me to be straightforwardly irreducible. If you want to explain to me how chemicals become conscious, you're more than welcome to, but certainly nobody's demonstrated it yet. And I can think of any number of insuperable features of consciousness, like free will and a sense of past and future. You follow? And the experience of qualia, that like what it's like to be me. The experience I have in the first person of being sitting here and looking at all of you, my own individual private experience of consciousness, and looking at the brightness of the computer screen and the different things in your faces. I have an experience that's like to be me, which seems to defy what the chemical world is experiencing. So I look at the world, I see consciousness is irreducible, I see the universe follows laws, and I see the universe is moving from point A to point B. It's expanding outwards. Entropy is increasing. That's evidence. You follow? That would be like Trump falling from grace. You understand the point? The gentleman on CNN had Trump had to lose so he could teach his kids values, because he wasn't smart enough to teach his kids values without Trump losing. He needed evidence to teach his kids values. Otherwise, if Trump won, it meant that, up was down and down was up. And Hiranyakashipu won, and therefore it's like, You get it? So that would be equivalent to the evidence I just showed you for the nature of the world having order and moving from point A to point B and consciousness being irreducible. Did you get it that time around? But there's another reason. There's another way I can reason back to something spiritual. And that's why I brought up the cosmological argument, and now we're all the way back around. When I look at things which exist, they're either contingent or they are necessary. They've either always been there, like the laws of gravity, or they are derivative of those laws and they're contingent. And all contingent things are dependent on other things for their existence, and either I have to posit infinite regression and circular logic, which is a no-no in logic, or I have to move from contingent things, unnecessary things, to necessary things, which are the causes of those unnecessary things. Did you guys follow that? Or you can look at things that change, and they have to be actualized, and something has to cause their changing. It has to actualize, and this gets into like Aristotle. This is his way of arguing. Thomas Aquinas, his way of arguing. That things which undergo change, something has to actualize that change. And at some point you have to work back to first principles that are responsible for everything else. This is what physics does when it postulates strong and weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity as the four basic fundamental forces. It's what physics does when it says that there are fundamental particles, like neutrinos and electrons. It's getting back to fundamental forces and fundamental particles. And when you say, well, where do those things come from? They don't answer you. They say from a singularity, which is just kind of like ridiculous. I mean, it's exactly equivalent to saying it comes from God. The only difference is they don't think that singularity is conscious, and we do. But if consciousness is irreducible, then that singularity should also possess consciousness. Did you guys follow me? That's how I use logic and evidence to come together to a worldview. So when Trump falls from grace, I can use that argument. But I have more fundamental structured beliefs that are true irrespective of what the playing field may be on a given day. I can make an argument that things which exist are either contingent or they're necessary. Contingent things are dependent on other things. If you don't want to postulate infinite regression, you have to eventually work back to a necessary thing, and necessary things must have always been there, because otherwise they'd be contingent. And those things explain other things, and now a necessary thing that explains all conscious contingent things would also be conscious, because you can't give what you don't have. Did you guys follow this? And so I can explain to my kids a worldview like this, and I can say, and so that God, now I have to explain how that source, that singularity, which is also conscious, is good. And this is something classical theologians spend a lot of time. I'm not going to bother arguing for that because I have a place I want to go and I don't have much time left. So we're going to stop there and we're going to I'm just going to assume a couple things. I'd have to argue that God was all good and all powerful. Of course, if there's a necessary thing that caused all other things, what is it? It's all powerful. And again, I can look at the nature of the world and I can see the types of things that allow for human society to thrive. And there are things like cooperation and respect and kindness and compassion and selflessness. And those are the things that make human society thrive. And why are we more important than animals? I don't know, because we can think about God and animals can't. Maybe they're as important as we are, but they certainly don't have the same ability to cultivate spirituality we do. They don't have language. And so deep thoughts about God are dependent on language. If you don't know that, think about how you think about God, and you'll realize it's necessary to have language, and animals don't have language. That's really, really easy to demonstrate. They might have something, some precursor of language, but not nearly the type of recursion that we have, where we can take an idea and link it to an idea and link it to an idea and link it to an idea, which is the feature of human language, which does not exist in the animal kingdom. And now we got to something special about what it is to be a human being. And so when we look at ourselves, who are theomorphic, who are divine-like, and we look at what makes our societies last and thrive, we see that there are these principles of goodness and cohesion and selflessness. And therefore those things must be representative of the deity. And that way we work from our experience back to God. There's other arguments, more logical arguments for God's goodness, but I find that evidence-based argument is the best. And so now we've got a world which is filled with rules, a world which is filled with logic, a world which also has one thing causing another, a world where consciousness is irreducible, a world where the source of everything must also be conscious, a world where that source, as best we can reason, would be good, and it must be all-powerful because it causes all things. And now we're an all-good, all-powerful God. Once I make that argument, then I simply make the point that Krishna, which is our word for the all-good, all-powerful God, is going to make the best of all possible worlds. Why would Krishna make the best of all possible worlds? Because if he was all-powerful, he could, and if he was all good, he would want to. And the best of all possible worlds means that you get reactions for what you do so that you have an opportunity to learn. And those reactions are not so instantaneous in every case so as to get rid of your free will. Because if Krishna was right in front of you, smacking you down every time you stepped wrong, which is kind of how my life feels like. I feel like Krishna does that for me, and I'm grateful for it. And I never ask Krishna to give me more rain and give me more rope. I'm cool with Krishna keeping me in line. I'm okay with it. You should be okay with it too. When you want permission to go and be bad, don't do that. Krishna will give you what you want. The voice of your conscience will dissipate. It'll be very, very difficult to get it back. Right, Kishore? We don't ever want that voice keeping us on the straight and narrow to get quiet. We want it to be loud and definitive, even if it's an inconvenient truth that ends up governing our life. So, an all-good God would create the best of all possible worlds, would want to. An all-powerful God could, and the best of all possible worlds means that there's a reaction for what you do. Whether that reaction manifests right now or next week or next lifetime, it doesn't really matter. The principle of it holds true, and therefore you can hold on to your values even when it appears like something bad's happening or somebody's being bad but they're getting a good result. It does not have to cut you off at the knees and make you incapable of parenting your children. You just have to be a little more thoughtful and a little deeper to get to the right place. Otherwise, you're petty and you're cheap, and your theism is cheap, and your value system is cheap, and a strong wind's going to blow you over. Some of my elders used to refer to shallow people as Dixies, meaning like a Dixie cup, because it only holds a little tiny bit of water. It's like your receptacle is not very deep. When you ask somebody who your guru is, you'll ask them, whose Kripa Patra are you? Whose vessel of mercy are you? You're a vessel. You're a vessel, and mercy's been poured into you by your guru. Whose vessel of mercy are you? If you're a Dixie cup, no matter how much mercy is poured into you, you only get a little bit because you're not deep enough. We need to take the time to be able to explain slowly and methodically without making any radical jumps why we can hold on to our values. Keep our heads when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. Trust yourself when all men doubt you. Make allowance for their doubting too. We've got to be able to understand the ignorance of other people. A friend of mine, UFC fighter. You see my student, was my jiu-jitsu student. And he had no kids and was more genetically gifted than me and worked way harder than I did. And he got, instead of my student, he became my training partner, they became my teacher. And he was a pro UFC fighter. He won UFC season 9. He actually made a movie called Game Changers recently. Game Changers. It's an extremely popular movie. It's made huge impact. But anyway, he was having a debate with somebody, and the guy was trying to explain how, I remember he was saying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wasn't valuable, it wasn't a good martial art. He was saying Kali, which is a stick fighting art from the Philippines, had no value. And James was explaining how by using the sticks, which are an extension of your hands, it actually teaches you how to use your hands in a more coordinated way, and the extension of your hand actually makes you a more chaste boxer. And the boxing style we have, where we stopped doing this, which looks totally stupid now, and we went to this style, that's because Filipino migrant workers came to California, and they would prize fight on the weekends, and they fought like Kali fighters do, like this. And then we went from this, which had been like the kind of like Queen's Rules boxing, we went to this because we learned from the Kali fighters. So and James at one point said to the guy, "I understand your ignorance." And then they sparred, and James destroyed him sparring. It was like he beat him philosophically, and then he also beat him on the mat. He beat him with the stick, and he also beat him with his words. It was like a lot of fun that day. We need to understand the ignorance of other people. If we were getting fed a bunch of garbage information, indoctrinated, we'd probably have all sorts of weird ideas. First time I ever came to the Hare Krishna temple, I told a devotee, I'll never give up eating meat. The first day I got there, they're like, you got to stay up and eat meat, you're a dog. And I'm like, I'll never give up eating meat. Now that guy's long gone, and 30 plus years later, I've been here my whole adult life, and then some. So yeah, whether Biden won or Trump won doesn't affect my faith one iota. And I'm okay with getting my karma. I'm okay with Krishna pushing me where I need to be. And when you look at our conception of divinity, I can go over time, right? When you look at our conception of divinity, and here's where I want to head. I want to start with the election. I want to give evidence and logic to show you two different ways of arguing and how they mingle together. And I want to solve the problem of karma so you don't depend on Trump losing the election to be able to teach your kids values. And you're not just saying, you should be good because it's the thing you're supposed to do. You can actually argue for it. And I want to use that to get to an all-good and all-powerful God. The same type of methodology. And I want to explore our conception of God. We worship God this month, and every month, to be honest, as a child. We worship God as a child because it makes us stop asking Krishna for stuff. Most people don't pray. How often, honestly, how many of you pray every day? When you say you pray every day, what do you mean, Madhav?
It means I thank Krishna for people in my life and for the opportunity.
You consciously do that? Not just chanting your rounds, but you pray. You guys are good. Half the room or more raise their hands. Most people don't pray. Then amongst people who pray, most of them just ask for stuff. You follow? Then amongst the people who don't ask for stuff, most of them just say thanks. We're not supposed to be any of those people. We're supposed to be people who ask Krishna, how can I be of service? Prabhupada's guru came into the temple. His eyesight did not appear to be so good at the end of his life. And his disciple, who was the priest of the temple, said, please come forward and see the deities. Come forward so you can have a good look at the deities. And he said, I haven't come here to see the deities. I've come here to be seen by the deities. He used to say, my whole mission was to teach you drishti, drashta, tattva. The truth of who is the seer and who is the seen. We're not trying to see Krishna. We're trying to be seen by Krishna. We don't come to the temple to see Krishna. We come to the temple to be seen by Krishna. We come to the temple to get our marching orders. We come to the temple so Krishna can see us and let us know what we're supposed to do. The difference between the seer and the seen. Drishti, drashta, tattva. We're not supposed to pray and ask for stuff. We're not supposed to pray and say thanks. We're supposed to pray and say, how may I be of service? I'm here for you. I exist for you. I was on a religious panel with a Hasidic Jew, and they were arguing about gay rights. They were arguing for gay rights. They were asking what our stance is on gay rights, which I always make this point. I answer their questions, but I always tell them they're idiots and they should ask me what my theology is and not ask me what are my views on social issues. Because what makes me a representative of my religion isn't my view on social issues, because you'll find people in my religion who are conservative and moderates and liberals and everything in between. And so if you want to know what ties us all together as a religion, ask me about my religion, because that's what I have in common with people. It'd be like if you asked a yoga teacher to come to a program and then you ask them what their thoughts were on gay rights. As opposed to, like, how does yoga differ from spinning? How does spinning differ from Zumba? How do these different, calisthenics, gymnastica natural, all these different, forms. That's what ties that group of people together. So ask them about that, because that's what they can represent. Otherwise, they're just representing themselves. So yoga teachers, are they Democrats or Republicans? Guaranteed. I know you don't think it, but there's a Republican yogi out there somewhere. So, the Hasidic Jew was asked. I went up to him and gave him a big hug afterwards. We're friends. We hang out. Practically, I go to these panels. Every time he's going to be at one, I go, because then we hang out afterwards. And if he's not there, I usually call it a miss. He said, wait a second. He goes, you're asking my philosophy on gay rights. Why not ask me my philosophy on sex? I don't believe that you have a right to have sex. You exist in this world for God's pleasure. If God wants you to have sex, then you get to have sex. If God doesn't want you to have sex, you have no right to just live and enjoy your life in this world. You exist as a servant of God, and that's the purpose of your existence. That's why you're here. You've been endowed with so many things that don't belong to you, and you should ask your Maker what He wants you to do with them, and stop telling Him what you want to do with them. He said that to a group of college kids. I felt kind of ashamed. I felt like, this guy is like the real priest. And I'm like, you know what I mean? What a radical view, right? What a radical view. So anyway, our ideal is we don't say thanks. We can, but that's not our main thing. We don't ask for stuff. We can, but we should really try not to. We ask how we can serve. And so we worship Krishna as a child, because children receive service from their parents, but parents do service for the children. Parents provide you with things, and children say thank you and grow up, suckling at the teat of their mother, deriving nourishment from her. That's the beginner's course. When you get a little older, then we teach you to be the parent, view God as your child, so you'll stop asking for stuff and you'll just start wanting to serve, because that's what parents do for their children. We worship Krishna as a child. We worship Krishna as forgetful of his own divinity. We worship Krishna who does not know he's God. Because if Krishna knows he's God, then there is a natural, insuperable hegemony that exists between us and God. God is so far above us, what could we ever do for him? For us to really be able to care for Krishna and love Krishna and serve Krishna and want to serve Krishna and want to do things for Krishna, we have to think what we do has some value. And so we have to forget that Krishna is God to really embrace Krishna as a child and really be of service. And Krishna has to forget he's God because Krishna is ultimately a lover beyond all things. And Krishna wants to love us. And love gets attenuated and blocked by hegemonies, by hierarchies. And therefore Krishna has to become one of us, one of our family members. And that's why our conception of heaven is an Indian village, where Krishna's there as the all-good, all-powerful Supreme Lord, the origin of every universe, and he's playing with us. Nietzsche said, I believe in a God who could dance. Krishna is God dancing and playing. Krishna is a private life of God. It's what God does when he's not busy being God running the universes, because Krishna is able to maintain all the universes with a blink of an eye. Krishna is God disporting himself in loving heavenly relationships. For this reason, we worship Krishna as a child, and we worship Krishna as bindable. And we bind Krishna by love. We embrace Krishna through love. And we touch the untouchable. We know the unknowable. We love the transcendent. And that Supreme Lord becomes just like your family member, just like your friend. In the same way that we balance backwards and forwards between experience and logic, we also understand these principles, and we also understand God's greatness. We bounce back and forth because if we start to think of Krishna just as a child, we'll forget he's God, and that's also problematic. And so devotees in this world bounce backwards and forwards between losing themselves in divine rapture with Krishna and nourishing themselves by understanding Krishna's bhagavadgita, his divinity. And these two things play backwards and forwards in a devotee's life, and they nourish each other. Just like experiential and logical arguments nourish each other and make for a strong platform. Just like mixed economies are the best economies. They have principles of free market and directed market, and they tend to do the best for the greatest number of people. The same way, honestly, that the Republicans have a couple of good values that I wish I could hold on to, and the Democrats have a couple of good values I wish I could hold on to. But there's no more centrist politics. Everybody's got to pick one side, and you got to take the whole thing kit and caboodle. And this way we want to broaden our minds. We want to become deeper. That depth will allow us to survive the Donald Trumps of this world. You know, one strong evidence that you can have a faith that lasts forever is you look at the early Christians, you look at the slaves, people who had horrible circumstances and managed to be faithful and peaceful right up until the end. Malcolm X was wrong. He said there's no question of peace without freedom. There's no question of happiness without freedom. It's not true. You can be happy and peaceful on an individual level without freedom. You can live in a world full of Trumps, live in a world full of like good people and bad people and mixed, and be up and down, be rich and poor, have people mistreat you, and you can see through it all and be peaceful. But you got to become a little deeper. Requires some depth to get there. All right. So that's what's going on. So then we're going to do kirtan. We're going to come up. We don't want you getting too close to each other. Keep your masks on. Take your phone and get the QR code. We're going to sing the Damodarastakam. Don't move. And then one at a time.